Okay, so today we're going to start to address each of the principles a little bit more in depth because you are going to be responsible in your group to be presenting on a principle, and your job in that assignment is to find 3 court cases or due process hearings and summarize them in relation to the principle. So let's start with zero reject child find. And so there are provisions in the law for child find, and very simply what that means is that the local education agencies have to identify, find um, all children who are in need of special education services and um, provide those services for those children. And so the zero reject principle is easy to remember. It's because zero, we cannot deny any child a free and appropriate public education. And so that's to ensure that all children ages 3 to 21, no matter how severe their disability, that they have an appropriate education at public expense. And it applies to all school districts, private schools, all of those placements on the least restrictive environment continuum. And so there has to be a whole lot involved in terms of education, awareness activities. Hospitals have to be connected to local education agencies, any type of provider agency that offers services to families and children. And there has to be annual public notification and circulation that is adequate to make sure parents know where they can go and what is done to serve their child. And so there's also a screening process that has to be built in so that the local education agency has to have contracted or have professionals and organizations in place that can screen the child for a disability. And this initial screening, of course, is just what it says, in that we're doing an initial screening to see whether or not a full-blown evaluation needs to be done on the child to determine whether or not the child needs special education. And also, to make sure that those professionals involved with the child have assistance and know what to do to effectively serve the child. There are certain components to the screening that must be done. Certainly, if the child needs hearing and vision screening, any of those health-related screenings are part of this initial evaluation or screening as well. And so again, the purpose and the intent is to identify those children. So the screening has to be comprehensive and making sure that we're not missing any possible disability the child may have. So in addition to the vision and hearing screenings, we're certainly looking at the child's functioning in relation to academics, but also those functional skills as well. Any area where the child may be exhibiting difficulties. We also need to make sure that that part of that screening looks at the child's ability to participate in a regular education setting, that the difficulties are not the result of poor instruction or limited English proficiency, and that that this assessment process or evaluation process is essentially comprehensive, and also that the parents are involved. If the screening and the initial interventions have, resulted in no improvement, then the child needs to move on to a more formal, comprehensive evaluation for special education. Now, the child may also initially need that more extensive evaluation, and or the parent at any time can request a comprehensive evaluation. So there are a couple very famous court cases that really looked at zero reject. And certainly we've talked about Brown versus Board of Education, and the reason that that's zero reject is it was a decision that essentially said we cannot exclude children from an education. And then one of the most famous is the Pennsylvania Association for Retarded Citizens, which gave us the language for the first special education law. And in relation to zero reject, said we cannot deny a child an education based on his or her disability. And this particular case involved children with pretty significant levels of intellectual disability. We had Mills versus the Board of Education in Washington, D.C., and these were children that had different types of disabilities, but the bulk of them were children with emotional disturbances that were being denied education. And in Timothy W. versus the Rochester School District, we saw a little boy who had pretty significant multiple disabilities, cerebral palsy and intellectual disabilities, and pretty much the school said we cannot serve this child, the child's incapable of learning, and obviously they did not win that particular case. And so we cannot exclude children. We cannot also exclude in relation to any discipline. We need to make sure that FAPE is being provided in whatever setting the child is in, and that if a child needs to be removed at any point, that we're still providing FAPE. And we have to make sure that we do a process called manifestation determination to see if the particular behavioral incident or incidents were a manifestation of the child's disability. We have a very important case, Honig versus Doe, in 1988, and this was a very high level case. This went as high as the Supreme Court, and so it really involved children who were considered emotionally disturbed. And it really gave us the language in the law for manifestation determination and functional behavioral assessments. And so it was really the start of looking at whether or not children who were known to have behavioral problems as a result of their disability, whether or not they could be expelled, and whether or not their program and placement were appropriate for them. And so that includes those are the important cases. There are many more cases that involve zero reject, and that will complete our zero reject principle PowerPoint.